emerald ash borer outside of regulated areas. So if you look at southern Maine here, you can kind of notice there's a cutoff there where there's no traps in that southern regulated area, as well as up here at the northern tip of Maine. But basically, yeah, we've deployed those traps right at the beginning of emerald ash borer flight season. And prior to this call, what we've just completed is the mid-season check of those traps. So they do have a lure component to them. So we go around, we take down every trap, we change the lure. And while we're doing that, we visually inspect them for any signs of adult beetles. So we've got that all completed for the mid-season here. We are fortunate to say that we did not detect any new beetles at the mid-season check here. So that's good. And then coming up here, right, probably beginning the first week of September, now that the core emerald ash borer flight season has passed, we'll start taking those down. So we'll take them down for the season, and obviously while we're doing that, we'll perform our second and final check of those traps to see if there are any emerald ash borer adult beetles on any of those, and we will remain optimistic that we don't see any, but it has been a good detection tool for us in the past. I'll also mention green funnel traps. So in some of those regulated areas and also outside, we have a small number of green funnel traps put up around the state at high-risk target locations. We have cooperators monitor those for us usually. So at this point in the season, you know, they are being checked periodically. Those are also all negative. So we have no new EAB detections via those green funnel traps around the state. I'll talk about Cerceris biosurveillance. So if anybody is new to the call and unfamiliar with that, basically we have a biosurveillance program. There's these ground nesting wasps in the genus Cerceris, and so they actually go out and they prey on buprestid beetles like our native ones that are closely related to emerald ash borer. And when you get emerald ash borer invading a new place, sometimes the beetles will actually bring that back, and that's one of the exciting happenings for our biosurveillance program here in Maine. It's happened elsewhere, but this is the first season where we've actually used the wasps to recover adult beetles. So at one of the colonies we monitor in Kittery, which is already a known location, the wasps actually did the work for us, and they brought back 2 adult beetles. So we were able to document that for the first time that, yeah, this biosurveillance is obviously a valuable tool when these wasps go out hunting for EAB and other similar buprestids. On another note, we field a ton of calls here at the lab about folks thinking they might have a positive tree. Fortunately, most of the time, those are negative. We're obviously still glad to field those calls and make sure they're negative, but we did have our first case where a landowner called in a tree that was in fact positive. So this happened in the town of Ogunquit, which again is a new location, but kind of evidence that, you know, in the known locations where EAB is in the state, we do have some populations building. So nice to know that, you know, our citizen surveillance is working as well. And like I said, fortunately, most of the time it's negative, but now we know that people are able to positively ID EAB and relay that information to us. Talking to some of our other cooperators around the state, USDA APHIS also operates some traps. So they have 4 purple prism traps in Acadia National Park. At this point in the season, again, like ours, those are all negative, so no new finds there. And they also partner with some tribal cooperators. So there's 12 purple prism traps on tribal lands. As far as I know, there were no positives with those. Tony Slowick with APHIS was going to check on those, but assuming no news is good news, don't expect that any of those are positive. Other surveillance efforts, we do have our girdle trap tree network in place. No new information on that. Obviously, those trees don't get processed to look for EAB until the fall. And so that process will get underway in October. And yeah, we have had detections that way in the past. So we'll see what this year brings in terms of that. And with that, that's all I have for surveillance around the state.
Thank you very much, Mike. Does anybody have any quick, actually, we're going to hold questions if we can till the end, unless you are certain that you're going to forget it, or you have a presenter that has to sign out for some reason.
Hey, Jan, can I just jump in?
Yeah, you bet.
I just want to let everybody know that the meeting is being recorded.
Yeah, so we'll be able to post it and share it for future reference too. So Moving on, we're going to have a quarantine update from Gary Fish. As I mentioned, he's a state horticulturist, and we're going to hear about that stuff. Gary, you are having me run the PowerPoint, right?
Yes, if you would
Okay.
like. Sure.
I'm ready to do so.
Go for it. So yes, I'm Gary Fish. I'm the state horticulturist with the Animal and Plant Health Division of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. And so I'll give you a quick update on the quarantines. So if we can go to the next one. So this shows the map of all the infestations as well as the quarantines that are currently in place. Of course, all of New Hampshire and all of Vermont are basically regulated or deregulated now. They just consider the whole area to be infested. And in Maine, we are looking at Aroostook County from Fort Kent to Eagle Lake to Hamlin. So you can see in the upper right-hand corner of the state, that's the area that's under quarantine. And you can see the red and kind of goldish, orangish areas that show the potentially generally infested and potentially infested areas. And then we have on the other end of the state, the southwest corner, we have quarantines in all of Cumberland County, as well as York County, and then the towns of Freiburg, Denmark, Brownfield, Porter, and Hiram in Oxford County. And if you could go to the next one, Jan. So this just shows a close-up, so you can see all the different townships and towns that are included in the current quarantine for emerald ash borer. And of course, a quarantine in this situation means that that's the area that we're very concerned about potential infestation coming from. So that's the area that's regulated where materials can't just move freely. If you can go to the next slide, please. And this shows a close-up of the southern Maine quarantine areas, as well as the areas that are considered already infested or the areas that are potentially already infested. And as you can see, it's all of Cumberland, York County, and that lower left-hand southern end of Oxford County. Next slide, please. So what's regulated in those areas? So the quarantine is basically regulating all true ash, so brown, green, and blacker and white ash, and all ash roundwood, all ash green lumber, anything that might have bark on it, chipped material that's not at least less than 1 inch in all dimensions, all hardwood firewood, because you can't tell. Look at a load of firewood, you can't tell if there's some ash in there, so all hardwood firewood is regulated, as well as rooted ash from nurseries, which we hope people are not selling, although we did recently have a situation where some ash was sent to the Lowe's stores in Maine from, initially it came from Maryland and then it went through Connecticut and came to Maine. So it's an area that we need to continue to watch for. And so this is, it affects all the material that originated in those areas or may have been held in those quarantine areas. Next slide, please. And so the options for moving ash, ash can move freely within the regulated area. So if you are moving ash from Cumberland to York County or York to Cumberland County, that's fine. It's not regulated. But if you're going outside of those areas, then you need to have a compliance agreement with the Maine Forest Service. And there are less restrictions on movement during the time when EAB adults are not present, when they're not flying. So from October to March, it's a little bit easier to get things moved than it is the rest of the year. And there are approved treatments for firewood, so heat treatment or potentially some fumigation. And we still haven't, I don't think, have this in place yet, but possibly in the future have some sort of a certified ash-free firewood or biomass chips that could be moved after being inspected or certified, or making sure that the process that's being utilized to bring those products to market are going to be ash-free. Next slide, please. And there is a penalty for violating the quarantines. It's a Class E crime. it's a maximum penalty of $1,000, or it could involve a jail sentence of up to 180 days. And these charges are misdemeanors. So there are penalties, and that's, you know, basically it. So that's all I had to cover on the quarantine, and I guess we'll be taking questions later.
If that works for you, Gary, that would be great.
That's fine.
Okay. So Mike is back up, and he's going to talk about woody debris management.
All right, welcome back, me. There we go. You're already ahead of me, Jen. Thank you. So, yeah, so I'm not sure, I haven't looked through the audience list, but hopefully we have some new faces and, you know, some solid waste managers, as well as some people that, you know, move ash debris in the line of their work, tree care workers and the like. So I just want to make folks available to this. If you don't remember it from any of our past calls, or if you are in fact new, you know, we have put out this guidance here for solid waste management. So yeah, every time there's a big storm, we kind of cringe here, because we know it's going to spell a lot of you know, down trees and limbs and stuff like that. And that stuff all obviously has to go somewhere. So that's why I always get those reminders from us, hopefully, about being mindful of moving woody debris and stuff like that, and storm residues. But obviously, there's a lot of stuff generated just in the course of folks' normal work. So, you know, that does obviously include the regulated areas. So we continue to ask that people are aware of what they're handling, and be very mindful that, you know, even though we don't have any new developments in terms of new locations that we don't know about right now for emerald ash borer moving around the state, we obviously have had these known locations going on, you know, a couple of years or more, depending on how long they were there, before we actually knew about them. So obviously, the longer those infestations are in place, the greater the chance of, you know, coming across infested material is, both at work and obviously in locations where all this solid waste, woody debris and stuff like that are staged. So basically, if there are solid waste managers on there, you know, again, we just ask that people are up to date on their locations, where they are in relation to the regulated areas. Obviously, things will be treated a little bit different in regulated areas versus non-regulated areas. Obviously, we encourage best management practices no matter where you are. But you know, our biggest concern is that obviously, in emergency situations and things like that, that potentially infested ash material is going to accidentally wind up outside of the quarantine area when it came from, you know, a quarantined or regulated area. So again, for solid waste facilities that have the capabilities, we are, you know, really hoping that as much of this material can be chipped as possible. You know, it helps with desiccation. It also helps, you know, if it's piled, to hold moisture and stuff that is not good for EAB development. So again, if the chipping is appropriate enough or fine enough, anything that's, you know, able to pass through a 1.25 inch sieve can generally be considered as safe material, and that can be transported freely. But you definitely need to make sure that your chips meet those requirements. So if you are chipping stuff and you need to verify that, I'm happy to visit your facility and look through that and make sure that, you know, anything you're considering moving is in fact safe to do so. But otherwise, yeah, I won't read through the entire sheet here. You probably have had time to read through the entire sheet, but just know that resources like this are available online on our website, and hopefully everybody has seen this by now. But please take the time to read through it. And if there's anybody that's not here that you think would benefit from knowing about this, please feel free to share that with them. So that's what I have to cover for solid waste management. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and I would just remind folks, I did put in the chat box a link to the documents that we've referred to today. We also have a lot of these documents, this one included, that is on our www.maine.gov/EAB website, where you can download any of these things to share with those individuals who would find them valuable. So Colleen, are you still happy with me running the presentation for you?
Yep, go ahead, Jen.
All right. So Colleen Cherling is a forest entomologist with the Maine Forest Service, and she's going to give you an update on biocontrol and just all kinds of great stuff. Always a
Okay,
wealth
you
of
wanna go to the next
information.
slide?
Yeah.
So before I start talking about biocontrol, you probably will hear people referring to us releasing wasps, which is technically and biologically true. These are in the wasp family. However, we're trying to get out of the habit of calling them wasps because people have really negative connotations with wasps. They think of yellow jackets, they think of hornets. These are not stinging wasps. They cannot sting people, they cannot sting pets or kids or anything like that. All they can do is those things that look like stingers at the hind end of them are actually egg layers or ovipositors. And Jan, can you go to the next slide, the next animation? There you can see that's how small emerald ash borer is sitting on a penny. And these are the 3 parasites that we are releasing for it. And so they are really, really small compared to emerald ash borer. So I'll just quickly show you pictures of them. You can go to the next one, Jen. This is Tetrasticus planopenisi. It's a larval endoparasite, which means that it lays its eggs inside the larvae of the emerald ash borer underneath the bark. And so that, again, you can see that thing that looks like a stinger. What it actually is something that kind of scissors. It's an egg layer ovipositor that scissors down through the bark and lays its eggs on top of the larvae, on the outside of the larvae. This one has been used for a fairly long time in North America, and we have found that it actually does spread fairly well. So that we put it at one spot, as emerald ash borer spreads, it will actually spread out through the area and kind of follow emerald ash borer. So this one has a fairly good track record for as long as we've had track records in North America. It is quite small, and as you can see, its ovipositor is quite small, so it tends to do best on trees that have really thin bark. So younger trees are up in the tops of trees. Go to the next slide, Jen. And so this one is Spathius gallinae. We have not used it that long. It's one that is good for northern climates, which is us. And so we don't know quite as much about it, but it's starting to also look like it does well at following emerald ash borer and dispersing, so that we put it in one spot, it will spread through to new areas. As you can see, this one is a little bit bigger, and it has a little bit longer ovipositor. So it does better on trees that are, or it does better on trees that are both young and old. So that kind of fills in a little bit of a hole that the first one did not fill in. And go to the next slide. So this is the really tiny egg parasite, Ubius agrilli. If you look at the top of the little cap of the pill vial that I'm holding there, that tiny little speck up there, that's the parasite that we're talking about. So really, really small. This one, we are not entirely sure how well it spreads because it's so tiny, it's almost impossible to find. And that's, I guess, the thing about all of these 3, they're not likely to become pests because they'll be in big numbers because they spend the vast majority of their lives underneath the bark of trees. They're also really, really tiny. They are not going to be an issue in terms of becoming a pest or a nuisance. So you can go to the next slide, Jan. So we release them as both adult parasites, which you saw pictures of, but we also can release them as pupae. So what the USDA will do is send us these little bolts of ash wood that inside of those are emerald ash borer that are parasitized. We get all these parasites from the USDA, from APHIS. So next slide. These are the sites that we have in southern Maine. I'm not sure if there's anybody on the call from northern Maine, but we also have 2 sites in northern Maine, in Madawaska, sort of right on ground zero, and near the St. John River. But down south we have 6 sites that we are releasing this year. We are only at this point releasing the Tetrasticus, which is the first wasp that I showed you, the first natural enemy I showed you, because there is a little bit of a shortage of of parasites. So next year we will hopefully be releasing the other 2 parasites at these sites. So go to the next slide. So we are always looking for new biological control sites in your town. If you have ash stands in your town, let us know, because we would love to have new sites. We cannot start releasing the parasites in an area until we know emerald ash borer is there. So we really suggest that if people have sites that they think might be suitable, to let us know. We're looking for largish ash stands. The ideal is 40 acres. We know in Maine that we rarely reach that because our ash tend to be more scattered. So we can go down to something, as small as, say, 2 acres or so long as it's connected to other areas of ash. We're looking for at least 25% ash. And it needs to be a wooded site that's going to stay in woodland for the next 5 years. So it's not going to be, cut down and turned into a development or anything like that. We're also happiest when we have multi-age stands. So there's some young trees, some seedlings, and that will just give our parasites a better chance at getting established. So if you do have any site that you think is a possibility, we highly recommend that people put girdle trap trees in these stands, because that will let us know the moment that emerald ash borer arrives, we'll find it in those girdled ash trees, and or at least fairly soon we'll find it, and then we can start applying for getting the parasites. I do want to also remind everybody that biological control alone will not save the trees that are standing now. What it will do is it will help protect the next generation of trees coming up. There's really not much other than the use of pesticides that is likely to save trees that are standing now, unless those trees are resistant, and we are seeing some resistance, especially in white ash. So not every tree is going to die, but we do know that biocontrol is not likely to save the trees that are standing now. So go to the next slide. So this is where in southern Maine where we have found emerald ash borer, and as you can see, the various, I have different icons for how we have found them, and the little green trees are places where we have found emerald ash borer using the girdle trap trees, and those are the places that we have been able to start releasing biocontrol. There's a lot of places there that you can see that we have not yet found emerald ash borer. As we find emerald ash borer in those areas, we'll start looking for more biocontrol sites. Portland, we have found emerald ash borer. We found it on a trap. We have located some potential EAB sites, and we have girdle trap trees there again, so that hopefully as soon as emerald ash borer arrives and we discover it with the girdle trap tree, we will then be able to start releasing biocontrol. So this is probably one of the more proactive things that your town could do. It's going to be for the long term, but if you can have ash stands in your town forests, come talk to me, and we can maybe talk about putting in a trap tree and hopefully do some biocontrol. So that's all that I've got.
Great, thank you, Colleen. Next up is me, and I am going to just talk briefly about a new opportunity that the Maine Forest Service was fortunate enough to receive funding for the current fiscal year and for the next 3 years, actually. This last year, Congress recognized that emerald ash borer particularly, but many pests and diseases that have been introduced to this country have become so widespread and so problematic for so many state and local governments that they decided to put some funding towards helping states, regions, and local areas to address both planning as well as response and management. So Maine Forest Service, primarily together with the city of Portland, but also with some help from the Maine DOT, put together an application to do some planning for our southern Maine communities, as well as some restoration tree planting, some tree removals, and some significant ash treatment. So with this grant, and it will be open to more than just the city of Portland, we just focused on them. One of the first things that we're going to work on is working with Bob Moosman, who I see is on the call, with developing a roadside ash management protocol. You know, how are we going to deal with ash on our state roads? And then also akin to that, we will be working with Jeff Tarling in the city of Portland to develop a Portland-specific roadside ash management protocol. And we'll likely be bringing in some consultants to assist us with that. And then also related to roads, we're going to work with the local road center to do some training specific to dealing with already infected ash trees. We know from areas where ash has been infected for much longer than it has been here in Maine, that it behaves differently. You know, it's not like felling a perfectly healthy tree. So we want to make sure that our road crews are staying safe and understand the mechanics of how to appropriately work in this infested material. And then secondly, we're also going to be purchasing green funnel traps as well as the lures that go with those. So as municipal forest managers, one thing that you can definitely help us with is finding people that we call cooperators, folks that want to put up a green funnel trap in their yard and then want to go out and collect material and report that to the Maine Forest Service. We unfortunately just don't have enough people on our own staff, so working with those cooperators across the state has been a crucial piece to our monitoring efforts for EAB as well as many other forest pest problems. So we'll need some cooperators through the southern Maine area. Colleen mentioned that those trap trees, we'll want to be providing support to doing more trap trees throughout the region. Again, in some cases, working with cooperators that would be outside of municipalities. We'll be planting some new trees throughout the region. We've budgeted for roughly 75 of those between our funds and through match, providing some risk tree removal, and then doing some significant tree treatment using some of the approved treatment methodologies. So if you're interested and you want me to follow up with whatever the framework is that we come up with for how we're going to distribute this funding and work with communities, please just shoot me an email and I will make sure that you are made aware of what we're doing. So that's all I have. The next up on the list is Aaron, and Aaron, you are going to run your own presentation, right?
I think to keep it simple, let's just have you run it.
Okay.
Things are going pretty well. I don't want to.
I think after our initial little hiccup being in the wrong place, I think I'm settled down now. I'm okay.
All right. All right.
So if you want me to animate anything, let me know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is not the most current version of my presentation. I made some small changes yesterday, but yeah. So my name's Aaron Bergdahl. I'm a pathologist, tree pathologist with the Maine Forest Service. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today about oak wilt, which is a new, maybe a new disease for some of you. Jan, I'm seeing somebody else right now on my screen. I'm not seeing my presentation. Oh, there it is. Okay, so again, oak wilt is maybe a new disease issue for a lot of folks. It is something that we're concerned about in Maine because we have a pretty sizable oak resource, and this is a real difficult one to manage and has all sorts of unpleasant strings attached to it. In terms of managing this in an urban environment, let alone the challenges of a rural environment. So, but I'll just get started with some background, Jan, if you want to give me the next slide, please. So oak wilt has not been detected in Maine. So that's number one. And we are actively looking for it. In fact, I have people out today doing some oak wilt survey in parts of Maine, and we will be continuing to do that over the next week plus. And we have been doing that earlier in the year as well. Oak wilt and the causal fungus were first described in Wisconsin in the early 1940s. It was definitely causing problems before that, but that was the first time it was identified by mycologists. It's caused by the fungus Bretziella fagacearum. Used to be ceratocystis fagacearum. That's ceratocystis, not ceratocystic, which is the misspelling there. But anyway, you might have learned if you were in a forestry school or something like that, you might have learned it as ceratocystis. Now it's been changed into the genus Bretziella. It is a vascular wilt fungus that's lethal to red oaks. It's very similar to Dutch elm disease in the sense that it is a fungus that is vectored from tree to tree by insects that are infested with spores from the fungus. And I'll show you a life cycle here in just a little bit to describe that a little bit better. The scary thing about oak wilt is that it can kill a mature oak tree within a month. It really hits hard and fast, especially if the tree is if the fungus is introduced to the tree via root grafts. Again, I'll illustrate that better in a little bit. So again, vectored by specific kinds of beetles. They're in the Nitidulidae, sap-feeding beetles. I pretty much explained that already. So oak wilt kills your red oak, or members of the red oak family very rapidly. The disease tends to fester in the white oak group oaks, and it will kill the trees, but it just takes years instead of weeks. So if I could have the next slide, please. So this is the current distribution. Oak wilt is found in most areas where red oak grows, with the exception of the Northeast, Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire. Somehow Massachusetts hasn't got it yet, or Connecticut or Rhode Island, New Jersey. But it is found throughout Pennsylvania, really, and it most recently has been found in New York. And what's missing from this distribution map is locations on Long Island in New York. And New York has had a lot of challenges in trying to. They found these populations or these points of infection early, and they've worked very hard to eradicate them, and they've really struggled to do that, thinking that they'd accomplished eradication and then realizing that they didn't, and sort of doing that back and forth. So that is the current, more or less the current distribution of oak wilt. But like I say, with all these diseases, it's only one bad decision away from Maine or any of these other states that don't have it yet. Next slide, please, Jan. So the things that we look for, the main symptoms of oak wilt are leaf discoloration. You can see that in the upper left. This kind of like mottled appearance, but again, this is a very variable symptom. Thanks. And we also see staining of the xylem sometimes, and most often when infection in the tree is more advanced, and that's a large central picture there with the knife. So in that way, it's kind of similar to Dutch elm disease. You get that staining in the vascular system, but it's much less consistent in oak wilt compared to Dutch elm disease in my experience. Also, bark cracks, and these are very difficult to pick up on, but the fungal structure that produces spores actually creates an enormous amount of pressure. It grows right under the bark, creates an enormous amount of pressure, and actually forces the bark away and will split it open. Fungi are amazing. This is one of the things they can do, just creates an enormous amount of pressure. This fungal pad that's produced creates a very sweet-smelling aroma that attracts those sap-feeding beetles. They get covered with the spores and spread the fungus. And then any kind of branch or whole tree wilting, and that's at the upper right corner and the lower left corner, where you can see some symptoms of that. And but the main thing that we are telling people to focus in on is oaks dropping their leaves in the summer. So any kind of unusual defoliation during the growing season is something that we really want to hear about, and we will investigate for sure. And we've been investigating a lot of similar situations where we've seen similar symptoms. Next slide, please. So this slide will have some animation. So these are the basics of the life cycle. It's primarily spread by the sap-feeding beetles. Next slide, please. Okay, and there's a picture of those beetles. I'm sure you've seen them. They're the ones that if you're out in the evening having a glass of wine or a beer or something like that, these are the ones that always end up in your beer. They love the smell of they love yeasty, sweet-smelling things. Next slide, please. So those beetles will visit a tree and infect the tree, and they can't just infect a healthy tree, without that tree being wounded. That's why not pruning oaks during the summer months is so important. The insects they visit wounds, and in doing so, those that are infested with the spores of the oak wilt fungus will spread that disease to a healthy tree that's been wounded. So next slide, please. So then shortly after infection, you start to get this mottled variable pattern of discoloration and dieback in the leaves. You start to get some wilting branches. Next slide, please. You start to get some staining in the xylem, and the fungus will move throughout the entire tree and down into the root system. Next slide, please. Where it'll infect an adjacent tree, and that tree will infect an adjacent tree, and so in a sense you can get these large pockets of dead and dying oak trees, like in stands of oak. And the degree to which these root graft in Maine is not known, of course, because we don't have the fungus here, but on sandier soils, oaks will very readily root graft. We estimate that on rockier soils, they won't root graft as well, but or as frequently or as readily, but that potential's still there. And so this is very, very difficult to control, especially because the fungus can live up to 5 years on roots of oak trees, on a site and on any size of tree. So revisiting areas that are infested is a really important aspect of management. Next slide, please. So these are the leaf symptoms. Again, they're very variable. Some of it just looks like senescence. Others, other symptoms really do look like a scorch type of a symptom. But there's a lot of variation in symptoms among the leaves. So I just want to make that point very clear. Next slide, please. Again, it causes mortality pockets. So anytime there's a pocket of oak trees that have died sort of unexplainably, we definitely want to know about that. Crown symptoms can appear from June through September. So it's a very wide span of time, although we typically, really look for this, people who survey for this typically focus on the months of July and August. Next slide, please. Okay, so staining of xylem may not be visible early on in infection and may not develop until infected trees are in advanced stages of oak wilt disease. And some people that actually study oak wilt say that they don't see, in certain parts of the country, they don't often see staining. So this is one of those kind of problematic or troublesome symptoms. It's in all the guides, it's in the textbooks on oak wilt, but oak wilt doesn't follow those generalities very well. Next slide, please. So these are those fungal pegs that cause cracks in the bark that attract the beetles. People that work with oak wilt commonly say that it smells like juicy fruit gum. And some people have such good noses that they can be in a stand and actually can smell oak wilt. They're actually in New York training dogs to locate oak wilt infested trees based on smell. Next slide, please. So management, I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about this in detail, but I just wanted to quickly touch on it. It consists of tree removal, vibratory plow, use of a vibratory plow, girdling and herbicide, and propiconazole injection. Next slide, please. So I don't know if anybody has seen or has heard of a vibratory plow, but it's essentially a giant knife that is pulled behind a bulldozer that severs root connections. So when there's an oak wilt, a center of oak wilt infection, the trees are removed, and then in order to make sure that the fungus is not going to spread to adjacent oak trees, they clear an area and they drag this vibratory plow through the area around the infested trees. Actually, a quite big area. I'll show you a slide with that in a second here. But this is an expensive machine. It's expensive to buy one. It's expensive to operate one. It's expensive to bring it from one place to another. And it causes a lot of, it's kind of messy. And so it's tough to do this kind of management in urban type situations. Although it's sometimes preferred to the herbicide, to other, let's say, just say other management options. Next slide, please. So this is what vibratory plow looks like in sort of a diagram. On the right, you have a double vibratory plow. The dotted line shows 2 passes with the vibratory plow about 3 feet from each other. And you've got the disease tree that's shown in with the red dot. And just sort of to be careful, all the trees in that area are going to be assumed to be infected and taken out. They just found that that's the best way to ensure that it doesn't spread outside of that restricted area. So in the diagram on the left, you can see that, okay, there's some dead trees in the center, but the first barrier that they cut with a vibratory plow includes those trees that otherwise seem healthy, and then they do a second barrier on the inside right around those dead trees, and that's just to try to make sure that it doesn't spread beyond in the stand. They really are careful because this fungus can move so efficiently underground via root grafts, root connections. Next slide, please. I left out the hack and squirt method. Essentially, when they find oak trees that are infested with oak wilt in the forest, what they feel is the most efficient and cost-effective way is to kill those trees with herbicide, to girdle them, expose them to a lethal dose of herbicide, leave them standing to dry, and then cut them down and try to salvage the wood. That's pretty typical in a non-urban environment. In the urban environment, especially for high value trees, sometimes propiconazole is used as an injection. A lot of folks advertise it as a cure, but it's therapeutic at best. Excuse me. It does slow the spread of infection in some trees and some conditions, but studies have shown varying levels of propiconazole uptake and presence of the pathogen during and after treatment. So this is not a silver bullet at all. Just want to make sure everybody's understands that. There's sometimes folks get really excited about the idea of curing trees with injections. It's not something that's common and not at least with oak wilt, not something that we can kind of rest on. Next slide, please. So the challenges of oak wilts are that the challenges associated with oak wilt are the symptoms are highly variable. Leaf symptoms are highly variable. The time of infection and crown symptoms is very wide. Here I wrote May through September. I had June through September in the earlier slide. I think it's safe to say May for this disease. The disease is highly virulent and kills trees within a month. Can kill trees within a month. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. But on your white oak group oaks, the infections can last over several years. white oaks kind of serve as a reservoir for the disease, unfortunately, making management and eradication all the more difficult. The disease can persist on sites on live roots for as much as 5 years after management, so follow-ups are crucial for successful management. Any size or any age of oak tree can be infected by oak wilt. That's not the same is not true for something like Dutch elm disease, which tends to only affect elms that are over seed producing age. Next slide, please. So oak wilt is definitely a cause for concern in Maine. Please contact the Maine Forest Service Insect and Disease Lab if you see wilting oak branches or whole trees, pockets of several dead oak trees that have died for some unexplainable reason. But the main thing, and the thing I want, if you remember nothing else about the couple minutes that I spent with you, please remember this. If you see oaks that are defoliating for no clear reason in the summer, please call us. That's definitely the symptom that's the most reliable and the most concerning in the context of oak wilt disease. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you about this pest that's not in Maine yet, but it's something that we want to be on top of if and when it does arrive. If you have any questions about oak wilt after this presentation, I would be happy to answer them. Actually, at the end of the, at the end of the session here, rather than at the end of this presentation, we do have several different forms of material on oak wilt on the Maine Forest Service website. There's a fact sheet, and we also have some other links to resources. Again, thank you very much for the time today, and I will conclude my presentation now. Thank you.
Fantastic, Karen. Thank you. Yeah, and we are coming up on an hour, but with our slightly late start, I think we're still doing pretty well on time. We have one more presentation from Karen Caluzzi. She's an entomologist in the Bureau of Agriculture and someone we work with closely at the Maine Forest Service, particularly on pests that have been imported and are federally regulated. So Karen's going to give us an update on Asian longhorn beetle. And I'm going to run that for you, right, Karen?
Yep.
All righty.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about Asian longhorn beetle. Did you put it up yet, Jan? I can't see the presentation. Oh, there it is. I'm an entomologist with the Bureau of Agriculture in the Animal and Plant Health Division, and I've been talking about Asian longhorn beetle for, it seems like, 15 years, and then we kind of stopped talking about it as emerald ash borer became a more serious imminent threat to our state, as well as oak wilt. But in doing so, by not talking about it, a lot of people became under the impression that it was no longer a concern for us in the state, or that it's already here and no longer a concern. And neither of those things could be further from the truth. So I wanted to give everyone a little bit of update about where Asian longhorn beetle stands as far as a serious pest for our country, and also how to look for it. Next slide, please. So a little bit about what an Asian longhorn beetle is. It's in the family Cerambycidae, which is also they're known as longhorn beetles. All or most all of them are plant feeders. So you would never see this injuring an animal or a human. They don't vector diseases. And there's quite a diverse amount of species in the family Cerambycidae. There's over 35,000 species worldwide and over 1,000 in the US alone. And in that line of insects that you see, those are all ones that are commonly seen even here in Maine. So just to give you a sense of the diversity of this family of beetles. Asian longhorn beetle, can you go back a little bit? So Asian longhorn beetle is in the genus Anaplophora, which is, there is no no Anapophora species native to the United States. They're all native to Asia. Okay, you can go forward. Next slide, please. So currently, and I think this is something that a lot of people forget about, is that Asian longhorn beetle is really, we have it pretty well contained in the United States. It's unlike emerald ash borer and oak wilt. The Asian longhorn beetle can be eradicated. And in fact, the USDA has a federal program to eradicate the beetle whenever it's found. So currently, Asian longhorn beetle is only in 4 states, the latest being in South Carolina, which was just found a couple months ago. Unfortunately, it looks like that could be a fairly sizable population with over 1,000 trees already infested that they found according to survey, which basically means the beetle has been there for quite a while before anyone reported it or before it was confirmed. So this insect in particular is really important and as an early detection species, because we can do something about it. We can get rid of it. Illinois eradicated Asian longhorn beetle. New Jersey eradicated Asian longhorn beetle. Boston, Massachusetts. And the success of the eradication program is when infestations are found early. Next slide, please. So another kind of misinformation about Asian longhorn beetle is that it's a hardwood pest. It's actually a healthy hardwood pest, so which is why it's a concern for us. It attacks healthy hardwood trees. It definitely prefers maple, but will attack other trees. It has not known to be shown to attack oak or apple. So those are a couple of hardwood species that we can not worry so much about. If you see a longhorn beetle associated with conifers, it is not Asian longhorn beetle. It's likely one of our Sawyer beetles. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the life cycle of the beetle, and this might help with trying to identify signs of an infestation. So primarily, Asian longhorn beetle has up to a 2-year life cycle in the United States. It spends primarily most of its life inside the tree as a wood-boring larva. The adults are only seen during the summer, and in Maine, likely adults would be out probably the earliest late July. So that's another thing. If people start reporting longhorn black beetles in May or June, we know pretty sure it's not the Asian longhorn beetle. They likely would not emerge from the trees until late July. August is a really good time to probably start seeing them, the adult beetles. After emergence, they'll do some maturation feeding on the trees and mate, and the female will lay eggs in these depressions in the bark. And those are pretty characteristic signs of an Asian longhorn beetle infestation. And I'll show you pictures of those a little bit later on. Generally, 1 egg is laid inside each of the depressions, about the size of a grain of rice. And then a couple weeks later, the egg hatches into a larva, which will start tunneling through the tree. Next slide. As the larva matures, it will bore deeper into the tree and will actually pupate in the heartwood of the tree. The pupation will generally, it takes about a month, and then the adult is formed and will start chewing its way out of the tree, leaving these really characteristic large round exit holes, about 3/8 of an inch in diameter. Next slide, please. And here are some photos of what those exit holes look like. They are quite sizable. You can stick a pencil in probably up to 2 inches. Other things can be confused with Asian longhorn beetle exit holes, like maple syrup tap holes, for instance. But Generally, the Asian longhorn beetle holes go in a little bit deeper, and you would always see egg-laying sites around the holes. So if you only see holes and no egg-laying sites, then most likely it is a different thing that has made the hole. Okay, next slide, please. And here are what those egg-laying sites look like. They're probably about a 1/2 inch in diameter, and they're just these kind of shallow depressions. You can actually see the mandible marks made by the female beetle chewing the bark in order to lay her egg. Sometimes sap oozes from the exit hole or the oviposition sites, and the sap might attract some wasps or yellow jackets. So that's another kind of thing to look for. If you kind of look up in a branch and see that it's weeping, potentially it could be an Asian longhorn beetle egg-laying site. Next slide, please. And here's what an infested tree really looks like. This is when it goes undetected and you've got larvae just meandering around through the wood, deep into the heartwood. If you take a cross section of wood that's been infested by Asian longhorn beetle, you would see these feeding tunnels and this large pupal chamber close to the heartwood of the tree. There would also be some staining around there too. And we do have native wood-boring beetles that act in the same way, but if you see this in an otherwise healthy hardwood tree, this is cause for concern. Okay, next slide, please. And then some other signs of an Asian longhorn beetle infestation. You do have this maturation feeding that I mentioned earlier. When the beetles emerge from the tree, they'll start chewing at the veins of the host trees and the tender twigs of the host tree also, and that's fairly characteristic. Frass, which is a mixture of excrement and sawdust, would end up spilling out of some of the oviposition sites, and you might get a accumulation of frass on the ground if the tree is fairly heavily infested. And then you might see bark cracking, and that's basically the larvae tunneling underneath the bark and into the wood, which will cause the bark to crack. Next slide, please. And of course, there's the beetle itself and how to recognize it. We certainly get a lot of reports, and so far they've all been false reports. The Asian longhorn beetle is a very large beetle. Generally, every one I've seen have been well over 1 inch long. Very glossy black wing covers with really distinct white splotches on the wing covers. Sometimes there's a blue tinge, and the antennae are always a banded black and white alternating bands. The male's antennae are quite long, much longer than the body. Next slide, please. And here we have a lineup of 2 exotic longhorn beetles and a native longhorn beetle. And if you have seen any of these, likely you are seeing number 3, which is the white-spotted Sawyer. It's black, it's got white spots. It's got the characteristic white spot at the base of the wing covers. But if you notice, there's number 1, there's another, that one has the white spot also. Number 1 is another Anoplophora species, not established in the United States, but has been intercepted a number of times. It's called the citrus longhorn beetle. It's also a major concern. We don't focus on asking people if they see the white spot much anymore because of we don't want to turn away a possible citrus longhorn beetle find. But if you notice, the sheen on the beetle is quite different between the two Anoplophora species and the white spotted sawyer, and plus the distinct white spots around the elytra also. Okay, next slide, please. And if with any doubt, please send us a picture. This is a picture that was submitted to the Massachusetts USDA office back in 2008. It's not very clear, but it was clear enough for them to determine that they had a problem on their hands. So this is an Asian longhorn beetle, and the one that led to confirmation of it being discovered in Worcester, Massachusetts. They're still fighting. They're still trying to eradicate it. 110 square miles in Worcester County is still quarantined after 2008, so 12 years of it being there. Takes a long time to eradicate, but it can happen. So if you do think you've seen Asian longhorn beetle or signs of an Asian longhorn beetle, please take those pictures. And we have an email address. You can send it to bugwatch@maine.gov, which is fairly easy. We have a website, maine.gov/ALB, with a report form. Just send us a picture, let us know where and when, and we will be in touch. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Karen. We are going to open it up for some Q&A now. So if you want to open up your lines to ask your question, please feel free to do so. You also can use the chat box window in your Teams meeting window. That is the little message box that I believe would appear as the third one from the right.
And I'm just going to start and say I have a list of participants from our meeting, and if you are on for credits and your full name is not on there, if you could type that into the chat box, that would be great. There are 2 phone numbers on as well, so if those folks on the phone are not listed in the participants, if you are wanting either pesticide or forestry credits, we will need to have your identities in order to provide that to the licensing groups. So go ahead and jump in with other questions though.
Hi, Tyler Everett here with USET, United South and Eastern Tribes. I have a quick question for Gary. We had a meeting a couple weeks ago about some trouble trying to get some signage on I-95 for discouraging the movement of firewood across state lines and within the state. I was wondering if there had been any progress the last few weeks on that.
So Tyler, I got your email on that, and I'm working with the governor's office on this. So I need to work through them. So at this point, no, not really any movement. I'm waiting to hear back from them. So as soon as I get information on how we can move forward, I'll let you know.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gary. I guess I'll report on my end. There is some interest from tribal nations to submit a letter of recommendation to whomever might be the right person to address that to. So when we get to that stage, just reach out.
No, we appreciate that, and that's what I'm going to try to figure out is if there is a specific entity that we need to address. Unfortunately, it's with the Maine Turnpike Authority, so they are kind of separate from Maine Department of Transportation, and it may be a federal mandate that is not allowing us to be able to use those flashing signs. So I need to do a little bit more work, and then I'll get back to you on it.
Was the question not just flashing signs, or was it all signs on the highway?
So there is a sign on the highway already, which is very small. it has to meet certain guidelines to be on the turnpike road as opposed to our other roads. We are going to have signs made for 15 other crossings coming into the state from all sides of the state, and Karen and Allison and I and others are working on that, and the signs should be produced fairly soon and erected fairly soon as well. But it's just the turnpike that has these limitations, and I think that it has something to do with the federal, transportation, highway transportation rules. So it may be something that we can't overcome, but at the same time, I'll work on it as we have already and see where we can possibly get.
Great, thanks, Gary.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I was also wondering if Colleen could share the map of biocontrol sites.
Yeah, I could put that on there. Yeah.
Thank you. My last question is for Aaron on the oak wilt disease. Is there any recorded mortality rate, or is it just that we're seeing them die in a month?
I'm not sure. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I was wondering if there was a mortality rate. How many of the oak trees that do get infested with oak wilt disease actually die, or if it's that 100% do, and we're just seeing it sometimes it's a month.
It's 100% of the time trees that get oak wilt will die. And yeah, not all of them go in a month, but that's how quickly it can go. Usually, well, trees can last several months, but usually the year that they are infected, they will die. If they're infested late in the year, they might hang on through the winter and die early the following year. It's a very efficient killer of oak trees, and they're really they haven't really documented much resistance or any resistance in the red oak population.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Are there any other questions, or do folks need help finding the chat box or anything like that?
I will just say about oak wilt, I guess I didn't really do a great job of describing this in my presentation, but the way that oak wilt gets around locally is via beetles, but over the landscape, the way it gets from way it gets into the middle of New York, far away from the contiguous range of the pathogen, is through wood material. So less definitely through firewood and oak logs and potentially nursery material as well. So those are the ways. It's human transport that's responsible for the long range spread, just like all these things that we talk about. So firewood's definitely an issue of concern, and logs with intact bark. When material's dried out, the chance of those fungal pads that produce the spores, the chance of those forming is less. We have we have the vector, the beetle vector. We have that, and we have the host. We just don't have the fungus yet. And when those three things come together, that's when we have a problem.
Thanks, Aaron. So in the chat box, I see from Jim Fisher, I'd be interested in knowing whether an EAB trap would be warranted in Deer Isle. And I can start answering that question, and then Mike and Colleen and Jan can jump in. So I think I'm going to start that answering that question with a different scenario, and that would be, instead of would an EAB trap, would EAB monitoring be warranted in Deer Isle? And the answer to that is definitely. Anywhere in the state, we could find emerald ash borer anywhere in the state, based on how readily it moves in infested firewood. The question about traps is a little bit harder to answer because it is a limited resource. So that, you know, if you're talking about the green funnel traps and had a volunteer who might be willing to work with us on those, then I think that that's a real possibility. As far as the purple traps, I think we find it kind of hard with the 200 traps and the resources we have to get them out to really cover the state well with that. So I don't know if that answered it or if anybody else wants to jump in on that question.
I guess this is Colleen. I guess I would just reiterate that if you have the ability to do a trap tree, that is possibly one of the more effective things you can do to monitor for emerald ash borer. They seem to be more efficient and more effective at finding emerald ash borer than the traps are, and also we just have more flexibility in placing those, just because they're, as Allison said, they're not such a limited resource. So I would, yeah, if you are interested in a trap tree, contact me, and we can girdle a tree if there's somebody there that can maybe help cut it in the fall.
And I'd say likewise, reach out regarding green funnel traps, because we're able to help with that as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then another question, Eric Grove is a forester planning to work with 2 landowners in Alfred on the release site. Are there any concerns about harvesting ash within this area? Colleen?
So yes, you can harvest trees within the site. We just don't want all the ash trees to disappear off the site, because that would then kind of negate the biocontrol. So we do realize that when you do harvest trees, that we will lose some percentage of the biocontrol, and that's just the way it is. So we expect that to happen. So yes, you can harvest, but you know, don't cut trees that don't have a value to you. Leave the other trees standing, leave the other ash standing if you don't need to harvest them. Does that answer your question?
I think Eric might just be in the chat, but it sounds like he is coordinating and has talked with Allison too. So we can follow up with him.
Yes, I do know that some of the landowners there are thinking of doing some harvesting. So yeah, I'd be glad to talk to you.
Yeah, and Eric, I assume you're hearing us too. I think that is a Project Canopy funded project. So certainly we'll be working with you throughout that process. That's at the beach site, I believe, in the town of Alfred.
Yes, I think so.
And I know many of us have worked with the town on that. So we will continue to do so.
I have a question on the green funnel traps. Is that something you need to have a trap tree at the site in order to install a green funnel trap, or is it just any ash component?
In any ash tree, the trap itself needs to be hung in an ash tree, but you don't need a trap tree.
And just a little bit more detail on those traps. They are baited with the same lure as the purple traps, and they need to be serviced every other week. So every other week you take a wet collection from a cup and basically just preserve it in alcohol and save it to send off for screening. So it's not like the purple traps, in that with those, we can hang them up in June. They get serviced once in July and then taken down in September. With the green funnel traps, they do require servicing every other week.
So Allison, I think in the interest of time, it's almost noon. I would say we're going to close the chat and close the questions. But I think you all also know how to reach out to us. And if you have any follow-up questions that you've come up with and want to reach out, please do so. Just a quick little wrap up. Again, this meeting was recorded, and we will share that on the link as well as on our EAB site so that you can watch it. I know some people had some older technology that they were working with and had a hard time getting into the slideshows. So those should be available. I think those are just posted as a YouTube video link. So we'll send out that information. I would remind you also that we have a wealth of information on our EAB site, and I encourage you to check that out. We have everything from information for getting that out to the community, the purple tags that we sometimes put out showing value of ash trees and how important this resource is to save. Yes, and thank you, Gary, for putting that link up. We have links to many previous presentations that we've done in coordination with the U.S. Forest Service and others that get in far more depth. Information and planning tools for communities, just discussing the things that a community needs to think about in developing a response plan. Treatment info for landowners, and more. So do check that out. Do reach out to us if you have any need for more information or help with that information. We are all here to help, and I appreciate your being here, and you're our best defense in having this information and knowing what's out there and what to look for. You are the ones that are helping us to make sure that we slow the spread of EAB or any other pests that might potentially come to our area and damage our forests. So thank you very much for your time. We will do another one of these in the next quarter, and we will send out that information, and I hope that you'll continue to be interested in participating. So thank you, and we'll close this up.